All right, welcome back to another edition of The Process Fixer. I'm excited because today I have Alyson Caffrey on the show that wrote the book, The Sabbatical Method. And I have to tell you, after our first conversation, you were so gracious to send me the book. And I was like, that night, I opened it up and I read like 50 pages the first day. And I was like, this is great. Alyson, welcome to the show.
Derek, thanks so much for having me. Honestly, it's still humbling when folks are like holding my book, like not in near me. I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's so humbling.
I know the feeling. I was actually at an event about 2 months ago. Guy came up to me and said, "Hey, I saw your name tag. Did you write this book?" And it was like a 4 or 5 year. And I said, "Yeah, I wrote that like 5 years ago." And he said, "It really." He goes, "It was super impactful to me." And he said, "But my daughter at the time was in a job where she was really struggling, and I gave her a copy, and she
Mhm.
read it, she implemented, it, and she got promoted." And I was like, "Okay, that's a pretty cool thing." So
That's a
it is,
huge win.
yeah, it's cool to see those things happen. Like that's the great thing about books and podcasts and videos is they're out working for you when you are on a sabbatical.
Oh yeah.
See,
I
see,
mean, books are
yeah,
everlasting, right? It's
they
it's
are.
super fun and exciting to think about, but it's also kind of scary, right?
Yeah,
You're like, oh, this thing's gonna get printed and then it's gonna live into, eternity. I know that there are so many more authors now than there were, I mean, 10, 30 years ago, but it feels so final to ink your thoughts, right?
it does. And I got to tell you, is this your first book?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm working on my fifth and sixth simultaneously, and I have to tell you that the biggest cringe is going back and reading my old work.
Oh
Because I'm
yeah,
like, my thoughts have evolved over 10 years since my first book.
totally.
And I read that first book and I'm like, oh my God, you were such an immature little baby. You didn't totally get this concept. But then I'll read something and I'll go, oh, like I forgot about that. Like that was a really good nugget. So
Mhm.
I tend to find inspiration for my future books from my past books.
Mm.
So maybe you'll be able to do the same in the future.
Oh, I totally have more books in me, and it's funny, I'm about to enter into another season of book writing, and I was like, "I have to read The Sabbatical Method again because I haven't
Mhm.
read it since it came out almost a year
Sure.
ago, last June, and it was really amazing. Like, I remember thinking and reading it, and I was like, "God, this is for sure the best work I've put out to date." And
Right.
honestly, I think that even if or when, right, you learn more things, you professionalize
Yeah.
your frameworks and the way you think about stuff, you will put out better work,
Yes.
and you'll never forget that first moment where you were like, "This is right now my life's best work to date." Like,
Yeah.
that feeling, I think I'm, like, maybe mildly addicted to, kinda like when I, gave birth
It
to both
is.
my sons. I
Yeah.
said to my husband, I was like, "I can see why women get addicted to this. You feel so powerful. You're like, I am so connected with nature, and it's the greatest thing I've physically done to date." And I feel like you could easily get intoxicated with that feeling.
I think that's really true, and I think I'll never stop writing. I've got 7 or 8 books that I've, started to sketch out just because, but some of them I know are future works. Like, this is an idea for something that
Yeah.
Derek of 5 years from now will be interested in. Well, let's talk about the sabbatical method because
Yeah.
I have to admit I really enjoyed the book because, I'm very much about analyze and design, right? I think there's lots of people out there to talk about training and enforcing things. I'm about thinking about analyzing what I'm currently doing, designing a better way to do that. And I liked the method from that because this is truly about a framework of thinking about how you are structuring your work in your life and putting it inside that, hanging your life on that framework. So let's talk
Mhm.
a little bit about what the sabbatical method is, and then we can move on from there and talk about what it does and why and those kind of things.
Yeah, so the sabbatical method is literally just a cadence of rest. And so I think the reason why it's important to establish a cadence of rest from your business is because it's really, really common that an entrepreneur or even a freelancer, right, will start doing something out on their own. And then all of a sudden, they're working 80-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks. They don't have a personal life. Maybe their family relationships, their health, even personally, might be in shambles. And we forget, I think, that when we work for ourselves specifically, or we're so passionate about what we're doing, that rest isn't optional, it's required, right? We need to build in those times for ourselves, for our business, because I don't know about you, Derek, but like over the last 7 years of working with business owners, some of them come and tell me, like, "I don't even know how I got here." They're like,
Yeah.
"I just put
Sure.
my head down and I kept working, and I don't even know how I got here." And I really do blame not resting. Like, I blame that because when you're
Mm.
at rest and you're thinking about what's next for you, you're out of the weeds of the day to day of your business, you can make those next strategic decisions that feel really aligned with you versus just being down in the mud of the day to day of growing a company, managing a team, doing all the things that are required. Even if it feels fun and exciting for you, even if you really enjoy what you do, you can trend 2 years in another direction that you now have to undo to go in the way that you would have ultimately decided in the first place.
Yeah, and I appreciate that concept, and I'm not good at this myself. My joke always is that weekends are just work from home days. You know, there's no end to the work. I mean, I schedule things, and I have honestly, I have to admit, over the last couple months since I read the book, I have tried to like draw a line in the sand and say I'm not going to
Mm,
do any work on Saturdays and Sundays. Unless there's a deadline, and then I will do Saturday morning for it. Like that's okay. Like I've come to the office a couple times on Saturday morning, but I've tried to physically separate out work from rest. And there's been some benefits to that. I think in some instances I've come up with better ideas coming out of rest, you know, coming out of like
absolutely.
Monday morning. I also have realized though that there is at least a component with me that when I am totally run down, completely exhausted at the end, some of my best ideas come at that moment. So I'm now like trying to balance that out where I'm like, you know, my best ideas usually are around 8 p.m. at the office after 12 hours of exhausting work. And I'm just like writing, and I'm like, all of a sudden it comes to me, right? So I've got to balance that out for me because I think for me, I'm finding that there is some benefit in the rest piece, but I also recognize it's like weightlifting. I have to work that muscle to exhaustion sometimes in order to get pushed to that next level. So I'm sold enough on the method, but yet I also have been a serial entrepreneur for 30 years and I've never worked a 40-hour work week before. I've only been, I mean, a 40-hour work week is like a 2-day week, isn't it?
It's so funny how the landscape changes. I was actually just interviewing a mom, business owner on my podcast, and she was like, "I had a really hard time being able to shrink my work day because I came from corporate and we worked 9 to 5. And so I was sitting at my desk no matter if I had something to do or not, just because I
Uh,
felt like I had to work from 9 to 5." And I do find this, and I say this in the sabbatical method, that our workload will expand to the available time that we allow it. I mean, it's a
yeah.
principle of life.
It's
And I think
Parkinson's law, actually. It's called
exactly.
Parkinson's law in the 40s. Work always expands to fit the time allotted for it. So
Yeah.
busy work is and this is why I do triage in the process work that I do is because we find regularly. I mean, finding 30% anymore is sort of a laughable. We've had companies 70% of the work being done is busy work. You could do the
Yeah.
entire thing in 2.5 days, but you work 5 days a week to you expand that out. You make it more
Mhm.
difficult. You add more meetings. Middle managers are exceptional at this. We compensate people based upon the number of direct reports that they have. So that means that the entire system, in order to win at work in middle management, you have to make sure that you get more and more people to do the same amount of
The
work.
same work. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so the best thing to do is fill it up with meetings. And when I tell executives this and I explain that and I say, you know, you have incentivized your middle managers to make things as complicated as is humanly
Mhm.
possible and requiring as much work and bureaucracy as possible. And they go, that can't be true. And then I have a 5 minute conversation with them and they go, oh my God, I pay people to complicate that. I'm like,
Just
yes,
broke
you
their
do.
brain.
That is exactly what you just did. And they're like, shit. You know, so
Yeah.
sorry I interrupted you because that Parkinson's law is something I talk about all the time. Work expands to fit the time allotted for it.
Yeah, it's incredibly true, and I think too, especially when we're sold in the beginning of starting a business, and this, operations agency, my company that I run is my first business. I'm not, from an entrepreneurial family. This is my first time. And so all I heard, all I consumed was that it's hard. You got to go. 1% of, businesses make it past the first year, right? Like all of that stuff that you hear. And
The
it is.
hustle mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, it's challenging. And I think in the early days, especially, right? You eat it up and it is required, right? It's a lot to
Yep.
start a business and it's a lot to make a really great product and design a really impactful service. And I'm not saying that's going to be any easier than it actually is, but there's this thing that happens like once your business gets legs that actually requires the founder to step back from it a little bit
Mhm.
and allow what we've built to start to run on its own. And that's where we start to feel, at least I have felt this, and my clients who've come to me at operations agency have felt, is that, they don't know how to delegate. They don't know how to
Mm.
trust their team. They don't know how to do all these things. And it's because what's been ingrained in their brain as, maybe first time entrepreneurs, maybe they had a failed business, they started a second one or whatever, they felt like they had to do every single thing. And
Mm.
that's what happens. They sit at their desk for 80 hours and they're working around the clock, not productively, right? They're on their
Yep.
phone, doing emails in the phone. There's not like a dedicated time to do that stuff. So the sabbatical method, I don't know if you ever read Mike McAllowitz, Profit First.
Oh,
He
yeah.
owns a company called Clockwork. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. So
There's
Profit
actually a
First,
great software right now. So my great friend Chris White, who was one of the founders of 90.io, has a software that works with the Profit First book that allows you to integrate all of everything into there so that you can
it's
actually
so
manage the
great.
profit of your organization. It's a great concept. It's a concept that I know and love. And it's something that I was recently reminded of it being with Chris and reminded myself, I'm like, you know what, Derek? I forgot a little bit about this. I got to go back and sort of organize things again because I tend to shove all profit back into growth. And it's like, nah, sometimes you got
There
to
are
take a little break.
seasons for that, right? There are
Yep.
seasons
Yeah,
for that.
sure.
And so Mike Michalowicz in his book, he like poses this big idea. And he was like, in order for us to move forward in any meaningful way in this book, you need to fundamentally believe and understand that your business is a cash eating monster. Right. He says that
Hmm.
point blank in the beginning of the
Yep.
book. And so he also tells this story about European dinner plates being 30% on average smaller than
Sure.
American dinner
Yep.
plates. And he says that his idea is like contributing to American obesity generally is because our plates are just gigantic.
Yeah.
And so I actually personally feel that way about entrepreneurs' schedules. You're always on, you're working into the evenings, our plates are huge. And so it's actually filling us up with too much stuff, like more than
Mm.
we actually need to be successful. And so
Mm.
if we proverbially shrink our plate and know that rest is required, not just something that you do, once a quarter when you take a week vacation or, if dare I say, right, like a month off in the summer, that's not just what you do, right? You have to weave it in all the time. So even
Yeah.
getting enough sleep for entrepreneurs is like
Sure.
super, super challenging, right? I know so many people out there who are just burning the midnight oil on something that they're super passionate about, right?
Yeah.
And why not get really clear on what that needs to be, get it done during your most productive part of the day, and then be able to get enough rest so that you can be the best leader to your business as is humanly possible.
I love that. And I think I think there is a misconception out there, and I do a lot of Vistage talks and CEO roundtables, and one of the things that they ask you to do at Vistage is when you first get up to present, you explain to the executives these are your takeaways for the day. And my first takeaway is always, I'm going to show you today how to work in your business, not on your business, and why that's so good. And people go, oh no, it's supposed to be on, not in. And anybody that's read the E Myth by Michael Gerber, we have bastardized what he said. Everybody says on, not in, on, not in, on, not in. Michael Gerber does not say that. He says you need to spend some time working on your business. You
Mm,
also need to spend some time as a manager of your business, sometimes as a technician in your business. But until you have outlined your systems and you have created a system that permits you to work on it, you don't have a choice.
yeah,
And
that's
everybody
exactly
just
right.
wants to jump right to, I'm working on it. And I'm like, well, let's talk about your systems. What's been documented? You have good SOPs. And they're like, no, I don't have any of that stuff. I'm like, well, according to Michael Gerber, you don't actually qualify to work on your business yet. You need to
Nope.
go to the beginning. Go to his website right now. Every free download on there is about, have you mapped your 7 core systems? Because if you
Yep.
haven't, you don't qualify to move forward. So it's funny how we've is memetized a word? It should be. We've made a meme out of this thing that he said that was really important that we bastardized to make ourselves feel like we shouldn't have to work inside the business. And that's just not true.
Yeah, and I think even people's definitions of working on their business are very different. I think people that
Yeah.
would consider working on their business is anything business development, and business development is
Mm.
part of the game. Like you have to develop the business and grow the business in order to keep it sustained, right?
Yes.
Revenue ops are a thing for sure, and you need
Sure.
systems and processes around how you plan to generate more revenue. So I think when people are working on business development tasks or, in the growth side of the company, we fundamentally believe that there's basically two parts of a company, the growth side and the fulfillment side, right? And that's
Mm.
pretty much it. And I think overcomplicating operations or overcomplicating how you build these systems and processes. I personally love Michael Gerber and his
Yeah.
7 systems
Yeah.
because I love how painfully simple it is.
Very
Absolutely
easy.
simple. And
Yeah.
it forces us all, again, to think in why am I overcomplicating this? Like you were saying before with your middle managers, why am I expanding my time so much? And why am I doing all these things? I should just be doing these 7 things.
That's so true. And I think if the father of the entire operations industry is W. Edwards Deming, and the work that he did in the 40s and 50s, and then again, in Japan in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then back to the US in the 80s. People think that Deming was just guessing here. Deming is the greatest statistician probably ever known to humankind. Every measurement you see on the news at night about GDP and he created all of those things. The census was created by, this guy was
Mm,
brilliant in his time and knew numbers better than anybody else. He said in the 50s that 85% of all problems inside companies, every problem that you have around delivery and sales and methodology, 85% of those are the result of poor systems.
mm.
And then, after analyzing hundreds of thousands of businesses, he came back out in the 80s and said, I was wrong. It's actually 94%. 94% of all the problems are the systems. And he said, if you are trying to improve the people, you're working on the 6%. You're working on the thing that's going
Mhm.
to have the smallest difference. It's going to make the smallest amount of impact. And then I love telling people that and showing them those quotes. And everybody laughs and goes, oh my God, that's crazy. 94%. And I say, yeah. So you spend 94% improving your systems, right? Because that's where it's all at. And everybody goes, no, I don't
Mhm.
spend any time improving my systems. Okay, so
It's
you
so
spend
incredible,
0%
right?
of time on the 94%. That's why it's so important. And I think you're right. Once you've systematized, once you have created some level of systemization, once you move beyond training and enforcing people inside systems and give them some tools to analyze and design solutions, and then couple that with training and enforcement, what you end up with is an organization that does allow you to extract yourself and focus on being a market leader in SME. You then can work that, the 4-hour work week that we've all been told was possible, but you can't do that until you do the work first.
Exactly. And define the systems, right? So I think one of the most challenging things, and I work with founders on this all day, is that it requires them to decide.
Mm,
And I think that's one of the most challenging things in the early years and even the growth years of the business. We all talk about, shiny object syndrome and all the opportunities that we could have to grow a company. I mean, look, it is infinitely, incredibly possible to do pretty much anything to grow your company, right? I mean, people I've seen, like, you got to get on Pinterest, you got to get on YouTube, you got to go and
yeah.
do networking events. Like, you could do anything. But I think the biggest issue and why people don't actually create systems earlier is because they need to decide. They need to say, this is the thing, this is one of the 7. And they almost feel like because they said that they're doing this and not those other things, that they're saying no to revenue or they're saying no to possibility or they're saying no to growth. But I've actually found that saying no more in the years of growing a company, it doesn't mean that you can never do those things. It just means let's create the systems and make this function really well before we open up another loop in another vertical. So I think
Yeah.
we go too wide too early.
I also think there's a reason that companies, and listen, we do a lot of work with construction and engineering, manufacturing, and if there's an engineering department inside your organization, you fundamentally understand that you have to build things from the ground up. When you don't have an engineering team, you think things like, oh, well, we just need a form on our website. Well, can't somebody just put it up in the next 15 minutes? And it's like, what is the documentation? What is the testing protocol?
Hmm.
Where do those forms go to? Does it integrate
Yep.
into another system?
Who
And all
answers
that
them?
systems, yeah. And they just, so what do? Is they just say, well, so they don't make a decision, and then there's
Hmm.
no form on the website, or the form goes to an email address that nobody has. And we actually had this happen with a client years ago where they were like, we don't understand. We used to get inquiries on our website all the time, and we haven't got a single inquiry in 6 months. And I'm like, not a single inquiry, not one. And they're like, none,
Mm.
zero. Like, let's test the form. Guess what? The form didn't work. So when
Oh,
we went in and changed the POP settings, we got 3,300 submissions that came through all at
whoa.
once because we had thousands of these because somebody didn't think it through. They didn't want to make a decision on, do we want to integrate it into the CRM? Well, we don't have time. That's going to cost $100. We don't want that
Mm,
plugin. They weren't able to analyze and design the proper solution. All they did was tell somebody to do it and get it done, and then they end up with something that doesn't work. Happens all the time.
mm. You just found like a ton of money in that person's junk drawer, like a
Yeah,
ton.
and unfortunately in that system, somebody was terminated because of it too, because
Yikes.
the guy who should have known, that just stood around and complained about no submissions anymore. Nobody ever submitted anything through the website, and that's the unfortunate part of business is that it does require some work. When you're building something, you actually have to build it. You can't
Hmm.
just throw shingles on the ground and call it a house. You actually
Hmm.
have to get a permit and you have to construct it and you have to have blueprints and you have to go through all of those steps. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So how do you employ? I mean, I get it. You need rest, right? We've talked a lot about systems because we're both systems geeks. You got to have systems to protect you so that you can have that period of time that you can step aside from the organization and focus a little bit on you. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I always say that the sabbatical method can shrink or expand to whatever it is that you need it to. So this could look like for some folks listening, just closing the computer at 5 o'clock. I know that a lot of us will just like go for it through the evening and work till 2 o'clock in the morning. It could look like just starting there, right? Committing to yourself that if I actually can't get it all set and it's not a priority during my normal workday, maybe I should question whether it's a priority, right? We are always prioritizing in our brains, especially with everything that's on our plate as a business owner. And so if we push it up higher in the priority list to get it done during the day, we should really think critically about what falls through once we close our
Mm.
computer at 5.
I love that. And I just want to make an interjection there. I've always had a policy that I will take my laptop home, but I won't take the charger home. And that worked really well. That worked really well back when I had a big old clunky Dell that I could only get 45 minutes of work out of before the
Mm.
battery died. My new Mac lasts 12 to 14
I was
hours.
gonna say you can get like a
So
whole day out of that baby.
yeah, so that doesn't really work anymore. But setting that limitation, right, I think is a
Yeah.
really good point. And I do, now that you say that, I think about that, and it's like, what if I left my laptop at the office for the weekend?
Hmm.
Like, would that might help?
It would. And Derek, I think there's another underlying thing that I talk about with owners all the time. And frankly, I talk about this ever since I, released the book, is that it feels really good to be needed. It does.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us, if we're being super real with ourselves, like if you left your laptop in the office for the weekend, there might be some things that you would have done and jumped in on, but most of it is ego feeding in some way. And I don't say this to attack you, I say this to
No.
invite
True.
you to think about how this could go. Because if you leave your computer in the office for a little while, you return on Monday, and all the stuff's still there. The decisions have to be made. Nothing's on fire, right? You can really clearly, calmly approach the rest of the things. And I personally find that when I come off of my restful weekend and I sit down on Monday, Mondays are my team days. It's the days where we go through all the priorities that we have for the quarter. We make sure that our metrics look really good. We do our one-on-ones and make sure that everybody's got what they need from me to go and move forward with the day. And I always approach those days after a nice restful weekend with clarity. I usually am trimming stuff back. I'm like, hey, I know we said that this was super important, but like, let's double down on this and just stay nice and focused and see this out. And so I find that it brings me a lot more clarity. And I did this actually while I was writing the book. So when I was writing the book, I decided, I was like, how do I make this not an oh shit moment for my team? I hope I can
Yeah,
curse on
sure.
this podcast.
No, that's okay.
Um,
I curse all the time.
I was like,
It's good for you. You don't
how do I
trust
get my
people that don't
team?
curse. Yeah, you only trust people that curse. Isn't that what they say? You're way more
I hope
trustworthy if you curse.
I hope it's okay. I always say something and then I'll be like, oh, can I curse on this
You'll say,
podcast?
"Oh,
Anyway.
shit, I should have said
Oh
that."
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And then it's all bleeped out. Sorry, podcast editors.
that's okay. No, no, no.
Um, yeah, I was like, how can I make this not a really big derailing project for my team? And I was like, what
Mm,
if I just woke up a little bit earlier and I decided that the first 90 minutes of my day were going to be just dedicated to writing the book so that I could go into the rest of my workday and just feel really like I've gotten the best work done in the morning that I needed to get done. And it just sent me into work with this totally reinvigorated, honestly, passion. I was like, I got to get up and like write my book. This was like so exciting. And the reason I did it this way, and I did it 90 minutes only. I know so many people who wrote their books on writing retreats, or they'll block a whole week and like go
Yeah,
stay in
that's what I
an
usually do. Yeah.
Airbnb.
Yep.
So that's excellent for some. And for me, I found that creating that habit and that consistency around writing the book at the same time every single morning, like legitimately wrote it on Sunday mornings, wrote it on Saturday mornings, like every single day I did it.
Mm,
And limiting myself to 90 minutes only, I felt like I returned back the next morning. Like I almost didn't need coffee. I was just like grabbing for my laptop, like ready to go.
huh.
And I was hungry for the next thing, because by the time you do a 90-minute chunk, you get in, you're kind of like, maybe getting ready,
Yeah.
20 minutes or so goes by, and then you kind of hit your stride. But then when my timer went off, I was like, oh man, I was like bummed that it was over. So then I'd go do my workout and I'd get this like additional rush of ideas that were on the heels of my writing session. And I would just jot them all down on my phone. And then when I got up the next morning, I would take it, I would look at it, and then I would keep going. I would just like almost capitalize and build on that momentum day over day. And I'd tried to write this book in the past. And
Mm,
I did that. I would block a day and I would write. And then I would do this. I would get super burned out by it. I would literally fold in on myself with my ideas. Like it wasn't as clear as it could have been. And I was
yeah.
like writing in circles. And so just even developing this cadence of like giving myself a super limited time every single day to write the book. I didn't write it in the afternoons. I didn't edit it in the afternoons. It was literally only that time that was available for the book. And I wrote the book in 28 days.
Oh, wow. No kidding.
28, the
That's
first draft.
crazy. I have
Yeah.
been working on some books for 2, 3 years.
It was
I wrote
incredible.
down, I'm going to take your advice here. I'm going to try this. I'm going to, I mean, my hardest part is with client work, with 40 plus facilitators, with 9 people in the office. If anybody thinks I control my schedule, you are sorely mistaken, right? I mean, it is like, I am, literally, I've double booked almost every meeting, right? It's like, I know I have a
Mm,
1 o'clock meeting. It's 1 o'clock here. It's okay. The first 15 minutes of it will get done. We'll wrap this up. I'll jump on for the last 10 minutes. I'll be, it's like I know how the cadence works, but I think
mhm.
you're right. If I went and blocked that time off and said it
Yeah.
was unavailable, then that's really different. And I love that model. So this is really about getting control of your schedule first. And it goes back to that, right? This isn't just about, well, make sure you take the weekend off. It is a system to say, here's how you organize your time. Obviously, we're both systems and process people. You've got to have those systems in place, but it is really a methodology in that. I mean, this is not just the book's not called Take a Sabbatical, it's a method.
Mm-mm. Yeah, it is a method. And you can use it to take a sabbatical, right? You can get
Yeah.
control of what's going on in your day to day and say no to the things you need to say no to, build the key systems, and then you can I take a month off every single summer with my family. And I've done this for ever since my kids have been born. So for the last 3 years, this will be our fourth summer. And it's incredible. And I think it's such a great opportunity too. Like every single summer, similar to what you were saying, Derek, on both sides of the extreme, right? On the rest and
Right.
then on the high performance. I get such clear ideas when I'm running. Happens all the time, right? Your brain goes
Yeah.
off because you're
Yeah.
working so hard in the
Sure.
physical, and then you get amazing ideas. The same is true when I'm being restful with my family. So I'll be like sitting there thinking about even like the legacy I want to leave. Because at Operations Agency, we believe that leaving a legacy and actually having a business that can thrive without you starts with building a knowledge base. We think that like art,
Yeah.
mastering that art of knowledge transfer is absolutely critical to making sure that you can leave something for your family. And literally, that idea, that belief set, and all the things came from last summer when I was sitting by the pool with my family.
Yeah. That's awesome. I
Legitimately.
love that. And it reminds me, I was talking in my last meeting about the DuPont method, which became popular in the 50s and 60s, where DuPont, did a lot of manufacturing engineering. They moved to 3 weeks on, 1 week off. So you got 1 week
Mm,
off per month. And guess what? They found with productivity, it increased.
I'm
Ford,
sure.
the standard work week was always a 48-hour work week. You work 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. There was a holiday one week, and they worked 5 8-hour days at the Ford factory in the early
Hmm.
1900s. And Ford looked at the numbers afterwards and realized there was no difference, zero
Yeah.
difference. They did the same amount of work in 40 hours as they did in 48 hours. When they were more rested, they did higher quality, better work, and in more of it. And that's why we have the 40-hour work week. And again, referring back to Deming, I love Deming's letter to Ford, and I think it was in the 80s, where he's like, why did you stop at 40? Why didn't you try 32? Why didn't you
Yeah.
try 28?
Keep
Why didn't you
going.
try 12? Like, what was it about 40? It was like, and
Uh,
I think the Ford CEO at the time had to be like, great point. If there's no difference between 48 and 40, why is everybody working? What if we would have just went one step further, and did a long weekend, and all of a sudden found that productivity was better. So I do think you're right. And I love that the fact that this is very methodical. Tell us a little bit about how they can find out more about you. How do you get the book? All that stuff.
Yeah, totally. The book's on Amazon. If you search the Sabbatical Method, it should be the first to come up. It's super incredible because it should only take you like maybe a day if you sit
Yeah, it's
down
simple
and
to
read
read.
it.
It's very, yeah.
Super, super simple to read. I am a big proponent that the simplest ideas have the best legs and are the most sticky. So I think if you have either been overdue for rest, a lot of us know we are, or you've been looking for a way to create some more sustainability. So whether you're planning, to create a lifestyle business or you want to plan a business to exit, they're kind of the same thing. They all kind
Yeah.
of require the founder to be a little bit replaceable inside of the company. And so I'm excited for the freedom it'll give you if you pick it up. Operations Agency is my company. If you're, looking for some additional resources from us, operationsagency.com is where I hang out and post all my best stuff. But yeah, Derek, I appreciate you having this
I think,
conversation. I love
yeah,
talking shop, honestly. I just love
I
it.
do too, and we need to do it again because I feel like we didn't even really get into it very much. And I'm like, we're already at 32 minutes. I'm like, this is just the way it always works when you have good conversations with smart people. Alyson, thank you so much for being here on the show. And make sure you check out Alyson. And really, I highly recommend the Sabbatical Method. Now, what I would tell you is this: you need an Audible.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
have an
I
Audible
have.
book of this yet?
You said that to me last time we connected, and Derek, honestly, perhaps you would like to record my Audible.
Oh, I don't know about that. It takes,
maybe
it's
I'll
tough.
maybe I'll convince you.
It's not easy. But I have to
I've
admit,
heard
I
stories.
I have found that busy executives, the sales of the book that I have on Audible versus the other ones, and the number of Audible downloads versus the written books, it's
Mm,
shot. It's 8 to 1. I mean, it's that anymore. I mean, it's
yeah,
just people are, and the reason for me is I have
mhm,
trained my brain to listen at 2.7 times speed. So I
right,
can get through an 8-hour book in a 2-hour car ride to Tucson or to Flagstaff, which is
right,
really beneficial because I can get all of that.
right.
But maybe there's also something where maybe what we should suggest to people is there is no Audible book, meaning that pick this up on Amazon and this weekend take a rest and read the book.
Yes, turn your Wi-Fi off. Just get
Yeah,
into the whole, thing, right? Don't
yeah.
close the computer. Get into the book. There will be an Audible at some point, but
Yeah.
there isn't one now.
All right. Well, Alyson, thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for joining us on another edition of The Process Fixer. Make sure you like and subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Check out our new website too, theprocessfixer.com. We got a lot of cool stuff going on, particularly around the acquisition of process triage and the expansion of that internationally. So until next time.
You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the process fixer. Help you see the bigger picture. Derrick Maines is the elixir, cutting waste away like scissor. Woo! Got a problem, he can solve it. He's an expert with the process, so for sure you'll see a profit. Bottom line profit. Analyze the work your people doing every day. Expose the inefficiencies getting in the way. Advise you how to automate, outsource, abbreviate, eliminate, innovate. Now there's more food up on your dinner plate.